Hi guys, I am so excited. By we I mean me, I've put together a review of probably what we can describe as the most popular 20 notebooks on the market at the moment. I've gone from super cheap all the way through to really expensive on the scale, and I've kind of covered off some of the key points or key issues around each one of them. One of the things that I really noticed, obviously, while doing this is notebooks are personal. So something that I might like, you may really enjoy. For myself, I looked for a couple of key elements or a couple of key through lines. So looked mainly for, does the paper bleed through with your pens? Is it fountain pen friendly? Because a lot of us use fountain pens. Is the paper, is there a lot of ghosting? Is the paper thick or thin? What color is the paper? Personally, I like white paper, and I don't know if I can ever go back now. And there was a variety of other things I looked for. You can see the list of them in the blog post below. I've also described some of the words that I use, like GSM, which is grams per square meter, and that's just a weight of the paper. So the smaller the number, say for example 80 GSM, is going to be a lot more prone to bleeding and ghosting than something, say, at the 120 GSM level or even the 160 GSM level. So we're going to cover off all of those different aspects through this particular review. So bear with. If you want to skip through to some of the notebooks you're interested in, I've popped them down below at the different time brackets, so you just need to click and go. Makes it really simple. If you want to watch the whole thing through, that's great as well. And if you're a new subscriber here to our channel, yay, welcome, happy hands. Super excited to have you here, so please stick around and hit the subscribe button. Hit the subscribe button and the little bell to be notified when we post new videos. Love posting videos and love chatting to you guys as well. So let's get started. Now before we get started, I just wanted to point out that the prices are in USD, and so United States dollar, and exclude the shipping costs. I'd also like to note that none of these reviews are sponsored or biased. I've used a lot of them, and as you see, we flipped through a couple of them. They've already been used quite extensively. And again, just to reiterate, in case you're wondering, every single notebook is personalized. So what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. The definitions of the terms I use are below in the comments, and please feel free to sing out if you'd like me to review a different type of notebook as well. Right, to get us started today, I'm going to be using my fountain pen, some markers, I'm going to be using a Tombow, my Karst, and my Eco lines. They're really juicy, and then I'm also going to test the pages with some watercolor. We're going to set the benchmark here with our Leuchtturm, and as you can see, it's a standard A5. It's got an elastic holder as well as two middle page markers. It doesn't have a pen holder, and the pages are somewhat ivory. It's got a space in the front to put your details, and then it goes straight into the notebook, which is fantastic. It has an index and it has numbered pages to make it really helpful for you to find those pages once you've indexed them. The journal lays flat and it's usually pretty good. It's got a pretty sturdy back pocket, and inside it's got some archiving stickers, which is really helpful if you have a number of notebooks. The reason we're using this as the standard is because the official bullet journal method recommends this as a book that they use. Some of the back pages are perforated, which is super duper helpful, and let's get ready with those pen tests. As you can see when we flip it over, there's quite a bit of bleeding and quite a lot of ghosting as well, and that's probably the one thing that annoys me most, is there is just so much ghosting when you're using it. Alright, let's test our watercolor next. Because the paper's coated, there isn't a lot of bleed through, but the paper does crinkle quite a bit when it's dry. We're going to use this notebook as our side-by-side comparison for everything else, and there are 29 dots across and 38 dots down. Alright, straight on to Moleskine. What you can see here is I have used this notebook quite extensively. It was one of the first notebooks I used. It's got the elastic closure, it doesn't have a pen loop, and you can see there's quite significant ghosting and bleeding. I've got a grid notebook here, and there's a little back pocket. It's pretty flimsy, and as you can see, it folded over. Not great. But if we start with our pen test, you'll notice that it is pretty ghosty and pretty bleedy. So let's get straight into that and show you what happens. Alright, have a look at that. It's also flexible, it's got a soft cover, and when you compare it in size comparison to the LT 1917, you can see it's a little bit smaller and the size isn't a true A5 size. We're going to head straight into the Archer and Olive signature notebook. There are 160 pages and they're all 160 GSM. For me personally, this is the notebook I use exclusively. There is very little bleeding or ghosting. You get two beautiful ribbon tags and quite a robust back pocket. There's a pen loop and an elastic closure, and the pages are really thick, so the chances of ghosting and bleeding are very slim. Let me show you. I'm going to dry with watercolor now and show you the other side of the page. The only thing that's bled through even just a little is that really squishy Ecoline marker, and even that has struggled bleeding through. On this notebook you will notice that there is a fabric cover and some really sweet embellishment. If I compare it to the size of the LT, you're going to see the sizes are pretty identical, but because of the thicker paper it's a little bit thicker around the top, and again your little elastic pen loop. So for the Archer and Olive, you'll notice that I've given it a first, and I've given it a first for quality, and it's got 27 dots across and 39 dots down. You'll see in the side-by-side comparison here that the paper is bright white. Onto the undated planner. What I really like about this is, again, it's got 160 GSM paper and you've got 12 months to write in, all undated. The weekly spreads are horizontal and the undated months are really sweet and simple to use. It's got some to-do lists down the side and you can fill in the dates as you need. There's 12 months in the undated planner, and the back has some graph paper, and in between the months you'll have some dot paper as well. It's got a robust, again, back pocket, and if I haven't mentioned already, the paper is 160 GSM. So you'll see I've used it quite extensively for memory keeping and some planning, and I've used watercolor on it, and it really hasn't bled through at all. I've also used stamps on it, as you can see. Those also haven't bled through at all. In the size comparison, it is a true A5 and measures up really well. A little bit thicker because of the thicker pages, but really lovely. Our new player to the notebook field is the ulllll Watercolor notebook, which is 200 GSM and 200 pages. It's spiral bound and is really lovely because it does not bleed at all and is made specifically for watercolor. You can see that I've blended quite a bit and there's no bleeding at all. Again, as usual, there is a back pocket, which I absolutely love, and like all the other notebooks ulllll have made, there's a little elastic pen loop and an elastic closure. I've spent quite a bit of time testing this paper out and I'm pretty happy with it. I love the fact that there's a very gentle dot on it. The dots are obviously 0.5 millimeters apart, and when you size it up against the A5, it's a little bit smaller, but I'm assuming that this is because it's ring bound and not exactly bound to the book as usual. On a side-by-side comparison, you can see the paper is quite white and much brighter than the LT. Onto the Happy Planner Happy Notes. You can get them in a small size or you can get them in the classic size. You'll see that they're 120 GSM and you usually get 60 pages per book. And what I really like about this system is you can take the pages out and place them anywhere. The covers are interchangeable, so you've got quite a large variety and you can change out the colors of your rings as well. Let's get through to that pen test and show you how the paper fares. What I was really surprised about the paper is that it is really thick, and I just love the fact that you can take the paper out. So if you make a mistake, instead of ripping out a page out of your notebook, you can essentially just take out a page and replace it back in. It's pretty fountain pen friendly and it's pretty smooth as well. You can see only the really thick Eco line marker has bled through and there's barely any ghosting. I really appreciate that about this paper, and really happy to be using this. In our comparison here, you can see it's much larger than the A5, and I really appreciate that about this planner as well, is that you've got a lot more landscape to be able to write on. You can make it as thick or as thin as you want. You can add paper or take paper out depending on your needs, and that makes it really helpful. Because of the larger size, you'll see that there are 49 dots across and 44 dots down. Erin Condren has made a folio that contains dot grid notebooks. They cost $9 and they're about 80 GSM. Now, I've used them and I've actually filled my Erin Condren folder up with citrus bookbindery notebooks because I found them far more effective. I found the Erin Condren really bleedy and just not great. I didn't love it as much as I potentially should have. But when you compare it to the A5 size, it's fantastic because you can take pages out, or you can take the notebooks out, or you can add them in. So as you can see here, what we're showing is just the basicness of the travel folio, and you can fill that with whatever paper you essentially want. Ink by Gen G created these lovely notebooks with beautiful embossed images on the front of things she's drawn in the past. They're 100 GSM with 192 pages. They are undated and don't have an index or anything else that you might want to use. It's got a notebook in the back, elastic closure, and one ribbon. Everything else, however, is pretty standard. You can see I've already pen tested these pages and the ghosting and bleed through is pretty significant. While the pages are 100 GSM and a little bit thicker, they'd be perfect for a day-to-day notebook, but if you're thinking of becoming a little bit more creative in them, they do struggle a little bit to maintain that good quality. If we compare it up to the LT, you can see the LT is just a little bit bigger on the sides, and the thickness wise you'll see they're about the same. Alright, on to Dingbats. Dingbats very clearly states that they're vegan and they're earth friendly, and like all of the other pages, they are very creamy. They're not numbered, and all of the pages, which is surprisingly, are perforated, which is really odd, but it makes it really easy. If you make a mistake, you can just pull it out and, not even worry about it. So if we get onto the pen test, they are coated pages. They're very creamy And when we do the pen test, you'll see that actually quite a bit of it bleeds through. You can see here that it's pretty ghosty and some of it has bled through. Can't say I love the creamy paper either, but I do like the fact that it's smooth and coated. When we measure it up against our LT, you'll see that the size is pretty comparable and pretty straightforward. It comes in a variety of colors and most of them are hardcover, and it also comes in a variety of sizes, which is fantastic. You can see the Dingbats is a little bit bigger in size, but it doesn't really make a difference too much. Onto the new Scribbles That Matter. Scribbles That Matter used to have 120 GSM paper. They've now moved to 160 GSM paper. It is uncoated, and you'll see that they have their standard items that they used to have in their old ones as well. They've got a pen loop, they've got an elastic closure, they've got 2 ribbons, and the card is really thick for this GSM. They've got indexes, they've got numbered pages, and one of the fun things that I really enjoy about the new Scribbles That Matter is it's got a center marker on the pages. Pretty robust little back pocket, and then onto our pen test. The pen test is pretty straightforward, but I found the paper, because it's not coated, is really porous. So it just absorbs all the watercolor, and anything that might be even potentially juicy goes straight through the paper, which is a bit frustrating. And I think they've, touted the book as bleed proof and ghost proof, but actually in reality it's pretty bleedy and it makes it a bit challenging. Still lovely and pretty straightforward. It's a good notebook to start out with if that's something that you want to do and you want to be more creative. When we pair it up with the LT, you can see they're almost identical sizes, just really a lot thicker because of the thicker paper. They are 27 dots across and 39 dots down. Onto Tomy. Now these books are fully customizable, which is really interesting. They cost about $33, but the paper thickness is actually really thin. You can choose what you want in the front covers. You can choose a planner, you can choose undated scheduler, you can choose a variety of things in those first couple of pages. And as you can see here, they add quite a lot into it, even a giant perpetual planner, which is kind of fun. There's a lot of questions they ask you around vision boards, around your goals, around your personal goals, your finance goals, which is really lovely to have up front. But if this is something that you don't want in your notebook, it can get a little frustrating. The other thing I really like about it is that it gives you markers on the page. What I did with my customization is I added drawing paper in the first section, and then I also added watercolor in this last section. They've got one little ribbon. I chose the color of the ribbon, and I also chose the color of the elastic band. You can see that I have already done a pen test in here, and there's a little back pocket which is a little bit different to a normal back pocket. And actually what happens is you can take the notebook out and replace it when it's finished, which is quite interesting. The pen test here, you can see there's quite a bit of ghosting and a little bit of bleeding, but if we had to do the same pen test on the watercolor paper that I've added into the notebook, you'll notice that there is barely any bleeding or ghosting. So if you were to make your whole notebook out of that, you'd be pretty happy with it. You can also see it blends really well. The downside is there's no dots, there's none of the grid that is on the other pages, which is perfectly fine if you're focusing on watercolor. In the size comparison, you can see they're pretty pretty much the same, obviously because of the little ring binds. It makes it a little bit smaller on the spine, but other than that it's pretty identical. Now this is one of the larger notebooks we're looking at. It's a fabric covered Millegram notebook. It's 80 GSM and 192 pages. The pages are undated and it comes with very basic little ribbon and a back pocket and an elastic closure, but no pen loop. You can see where I've done the pen test and also counting the numbered dots. It's a great size for the back pocket because it's a B5, so it's a lot bigger. You can see where I've done the pen testing that actually it bleeds through and ghosts quite significantly. That obviously is because of the lower GSM paper. For me, I didn't love using this notebook only because of the ghosting and bleeding, but it does have a lovely coated feel to it. So if you're using fountain pens, probably a lovely book just to get started with. I also like the extra space of the B5. Onto Citrus Book Bindery. Everything is customizable down to the string on your spine. You can even change the way that your spine is bound. It's got an elastic closure, doesn't have an elastic loop for a pen, and then here I've got grid pages, but it would be identical with dot pages. They're quite dark dots, and the cost is anywhere upward of $35. You can get them from 120 GSM to 225 GSM, and it's fully customizable, so you could have a back pocket in here. I chose not to have a back pocket. When we do the pen testing, you can see here on my 125 GSM paper that it barely bleeds and it barely ghosts as well, but it's a really great notebook. It's a little bit grippy, so the paper is a little scratchy because it is uncoated, and you'll see there's some bleed through from the Eco line markers. The pages are all numbered, but you can also choose whether or not you want numbered pages or not. And obviously there are 3 ribbons. You can choose how many ribbons you want, and you can also choose the edging if you want square paper or rounded paper. And essentially everything in this notebook is customizable. Love that, and that's probably what drives up the price. In comparison, it's a little bit bigger than the standard A5, but that's totally okay because I've chosen 188 of those thicker pages. It's got 24 dots across and 41 dots down, and pretty bright white paper in a side-by-side comparison. What an interesting concept. This paper is made of stone, which is really interesting, and the cover has a very weird feel to it. Very standard and very basic, very simple opening pages. Doesn't have an elastic closure. It's got 1 ribbon, and the paper is very heavy. It literally feels heavier than normal paper, which is interesting. I've already pen tested this paper, but I'm going to go through pen testing it again with you because I want to show you some of the characteristics of it. It's got a stone paper back pocket, and it says that the paper is tear-proof and bleed-proof. So using my fountain pen, what's interesting about it, you'll see, granted this is a time lapse, but even with the time lapse, it still stays smudgy because the paper is waterproof, which is really frustrating. So if we go and dry the paper, because it reacts to heat, it becomes very brittle and hard and very crumbly, which is really bizarre. So you can't really use the paper for anything other than pretty much ballpoint pens. You can see all of the tests I've run here. The paper's practically hard and kind of weird. Again, they say it's tear-proof, but if you get it at the right angle, you can totally tear it. It's actually quite interesting because you can stretch it. It's kind of like a plastic polymer paper. And again, you can see here that it's feathered quite a bit over time. The paper is very odd in that respect, and it might take getting used to it. You can see that it's bled through or ghosted quite a bit. It says that it's 120 GSM paper. It doesn't quite feel like that, but it definitely is much heavier than the A5 notebook. Size-wise, it's identical, and it only has 144 pages, which is quite interesting. Graphic Arts for me was a bit of a surprise. There are 100 GSM and 149 pages, so quite a lot of pages. They've got a key, an index, and then they go straight into their numbered pages. It's actually a really lovely notebook. I don't have any problems with it. I think the cost is pretty reasonable, and I think it's a pretty good one if you're starting out. They've got a little back pocket which is pretty robust. It's got canvas on the side, and they've got 2 markers. When we get into pen testing, we hit a couple of snags. They are a little bit bleedy and a little bit ghosty, but they're not as bad as some of the other notebooks we've looked at in the past. When we have a look closer, you can see here that the really juicy pens have bled straight through, and the paper has crumpled a little bit with the watercolor on it. The Rhodia Goal book. Now this is an interesting notebook. It's made with Clairefontaine paper, which is amazing. It's flexible, which is really cool. It's got 90 GSM and 120 numbered pages. It's got a welcome page and an index, and then it goes into kind of like a calendar page, which I quite like for a future log, and then has a more in-depth event page for calendars as well, and then onto its numbered dot grid. It's got 2 orange, or whichever color you choose essentially, little ribbons, and a back pocket. It doesn't have a pen loop, but it does have an elastic closure. When we pen test it here, you can see that some of the pens do leak through to the other side, and there's a little bit of ghosting. But what we can see as well is that Clairefontaine paper with the coated smoothness of it is really lovely for your fountain pen and very little smudging. When we compare it in size, you'll see that it's almost identical to the LT. Size-wise, it's pretty straightforward, and it's about the same thickness as well. Onto the Lemome. The Lemome is really lovely. I find that it's a perfect notebook for those that are starting out. It's 120 GSM and it's got 180 numbered pages. There's a couple of pages in the back that are perforated, which is really helpful, and obviously it has an index to keep track of those numbered pages or sections that you're using. It has 2 ribbons, and then at the back it has a little robust pocket. And what's interesting about the Lemome is it comes with a whole bunch of weird little things like tattoos and a ruler and some emoji stickers and some archiving stickers. It's very odd, but it's fun anyway. It comes with a pen loop and obviously the elastic closure. What I like about this notebook is it's pretty much cheap and cheerful. You know, you're not going to go for the most expensive notebook when you're starting out, but this is great at $15.99, and you're getting a nice thick notebook as well. And then those little tabs at the back so that you can kind of tear up pages if needed. If we do the pen test, you'll notice that there is a little bit of ghosting and bleeding, but not anything to be overly concerned about. It's pretty fountain pen friendly, and they have a lovely coating on the paper, so it's not as rough as some of the other notebooks we've had a look at. Watercolor, pretty much standard. It crinkles the paper just a little bit, and you'll see here when we turn it over that the two juicy pens have really gone through, but the watercolor's pretty much stayed on the page. In comparison to the LT size, when we put them together, they're pretty identical. I'd say we'd call it a true A5 size, and it's a little bit thicker because of the extra pages. On to Mossery Co. So Mossery is really interesting. Again, you can customize your notebook quite extensively. I chose a pastel color, and there's a little ribbon and an elastic closure. Doesn't have a pen loop, but it's got a little cover on the front page. And then we go into, much like the Tomy notebook, it goes into a whole bunch of details. So you've got your details page, it's got vision boards, it's got questions about your goals and goal setting, it's got intentions for the year, and a whole bunch of other things around what you should be kind of tracking to make sure that you are keeping on top of your goals and aspirations. Then we go into the notebook itself. And what's interesting is it's only 100 GSM, but the pages feel a lot thinner than that, and they ghost and bleed quite a bit. You can see I've stamped in some stuff here, and it's just gone straight through. I've also pen tested, and you can see the ghosting, which is quite significant, and quite a bit of bleed through. We're going to add fountain pen in here, and we're just going to add a couple more of those pens to test to show you kind of how it holds up against watercolor and those juicy pens. The watercolor crinkles the paper quite a bit, and you can see that they've bled through quite significantly. There's not really any feathering on the fountain pen, but there is definitely bleed through and ghosting. It's got a little back pocket, which is a little bit different than usual, and a space for cards. When we look at the size comparison, it's about the same size as the LT, and because it's different, it is a little bit shorter, I found, but it's about the same thickness as well. On to Tumbitri Meri. This is a new player, and I actually really like this because it's got a pen loop on the side, elastic pen loop, it's got the elastic closure, and it has 3 ribbons. It also actually comes with a ruler, but I took the ruler out and forgot to put it back in. It has a key, it's got indexes, it's got a whole bunch of pages, so it's got 180 numbered pages, and it's 120 GSM, so it's very similar to the Lemome, but obviously has those couple of extras. You can see on the pen test here that it is also perforated pages, which is really cool. And if you make a mistake, then obviously you can kind of go back and tear your page out. You can see it has very little ghosting and bleeding, but you can still see some of the thicker pens coming through, like that Eco line. I'd say I really enjoy this notebook as a great notebook for newbies or those starting out, and I also really like the company principles as well, and I think that's probably what draws me to it over the Lemome. In size comparison wise, I'd call it a true A5. You can see that it measures up pretty standardly against the LT, and it looks about the same thickness, but it definitely has a lot more pages. And that brings us to the end of our review. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to have any, or if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below and I'll try and get back to them as soon as possible. Please hit the subscribe button and the little bell. We would love to hear from you, so please hit that, or hit us up on social media. All the contact details are down below as well.